Welcome to another episode of the SPARKCast podcast. I'm your host, Adrian Mathis, along with my co-host,
Atika Johnson.
And today we have a very special guest.
Yes, today we have Mr. Alex Knight. He is currently the course director for artist management in the music business and entertainment business bachelor's program here at Full Sail University. So you're also a writer and a musician,
yes,
right?
Yeah.
So how did you get started with writing and music?
I've been writing as long as I can remember, just different things. Excuse me. Sometimes I, ended up as a kid just channeling that into poetry. And then I got a little bit older and started playing guitar when I was 10. Started playing in bands when I was like 14. I have a younger brother who's, I kind of forced him into drumming so that he could play with me. So that was cool. I always had like a built-in drummer in the house. And so we wrote songs together and then started playing in bands from there.
Okay.
Cool. So as far as becoming an instructor at Full Sail, how did that come about?
Well, I was in a band for a number of years that toured, and that kind of fell apart at a certain point. Mm-hmm. And it left me wondering what I was supposed to be doing because that's all I had worked towards up until then, And we got into a certain point where I realized that I actually didn't enjoy living on the road very much as I thought I was going to. And so I was kind of looking for a place of creative projects, things like this happening, but that also allowed me to kind of put my experience to use, to youth. I'm sorry. No, to use. I said the right word. And I honestly, I was looking at getting my master's degree here and just happened to click on the jobs thing. It was like, my experience is actually valuable somewhere, because I grew up in Alabama and that was not the case there. Nobody, if you say you're in the entertainment industry in Alabama, nobody knows what to do with you. So they're like, but what do you really want to do? So seeing that there was like a hub here of creative people, I really enjoyed it and started with the event management class in the entertainment business program, and then transitioned to artist management and music business program.
Right. Okay. So as far as your career, I want to know more about your career, touring and what you liked about it, what you didn't like about it.
For sure.
The reasons why it led to you wanting to change your atmosphere.
Yeah, well, it's so we did it for a long time. Like I was on the road. I honestly whenever this conversation happens, I'd go back in my head and I'm like, how long was it actually? And I've never actually taken the time to go figure it out because it was like spread out, but maybe 4 or 5 years, something like that we were touring pretty consistently.
Okay.
So I don't know if you know anyone that has been like in that lifestyle or not, but it's it's all the things that you kind of hear about. It's grueling. Like most people talk about the fun experiences, the crazy stories, the shows, and all that stuff. But if you think about what the day-to-day life is like, it's like 8 hours, 10 hours in a van or whatever, and you're sleeping in the back of it, or you're having to stay at random people's houses and they're disgusting and things like that. So that's what took the toll on me, I think. And also, I mean, you all know, studying the music business, like money right now is unreliable unless if you're one of the lucky few that get up to like beyond the middle class of musicians,
Right.
But like when you're kind of in that middle class of working musicians, you have to keep going constantly. And if you stop, the money stops.
Right.
And you need like every little bit to help you along, like while you're trying to make ends meet. So yeah, it was grueling. We got to a point where we were attracting label attention. But at the same time, a lot of our friends were too. And we were finding that some of them were like, not in deals that they were particularly happy with or that they felt like were going to lead to them succeeding. So once we got to that point, we were already kind of fractured over a couple of other things, and then we weren't thrilled with what was being presented to us, and we weren't sure that it was going to lead us into it almost seemed like it was going to lock us into, hey, you're going to be on the road the next 7 years, and we don't know if you're going to break even, and that was just a hard place to be. Like, and
understand.
So yeah. Anytime a band breaks up, there's like 15 things that lead to it. That was like one of the cracks for us, but yeah.
Right. So as far as being on the management side, you were also a tour manager as well. As far as being on the manager side, did that experience from being an artist kind of clash with that
No, actually, it kind of like led to it directly because I very much come from like the DIY world of, like I started off in like a pop punk band when I was younger, and everyone was just trying to make things happen for themselves. So the only reason that I even got into management or tour management or anything like that is just because everybody else in the band was too lazy to do it. So, and I was the only one that was like motivated and ambitious. And I was like, we got to make something happen because I got to get out of Alabama. So it was just nonstop, just how do you book a show? How do you promote a show? How do I get out of this city? How do I, and you just by accident, you kind of fall backwards into figuring out what you're doing for real, you know, and then once people in our local scene realized that I was figuring those things out, then they wanted help doing their own stuff. And so that's kind of how I got into that. But largely most of my work was done for bands that I was in. I was kind of de facto managing them, or we would split up duties. And so we all learned a little bit about booking and merchandising and all those kinds of things that way. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So switching gears to your role here as course director, do your students often ask you those stories about your time on the road and being on tour, and what advice do you usually give them?
That's probably the thing I'm asked about the most frequently. I talk about it, like I build it into my curriculum for sure. Like I tell a few stories, but I also try to make it a point to pull lessons from the stories. Right. There's a lot of things where you could just be like, oh, that's funny. But I think it's kind of important to like really zoom out and be like, all right, so how did that shape our behavior moving forward or whatever? So the thing that I tell them, if they want to get into this line of work, is test it out, make sure that it's for you. And the way that you kind of do that, find some local artists or some like underground artists that you can realistically get in contact with. And, just start making yourself present in their work, whether it means showing up to their shows or whatever. But let them know, hey, I'm serious. I'm thinking about doing this for a line of work. I'd love to help you with whatever you specialize in. Maybe you do graphic design. Maybe you do video editing, Maybe you're looking to learn how to actually book shows or tour management. So let them know what you're interested in and what you do. And then start kind of putting yourself out there of like, I'd like to be of help any way I can. I'll do it for free for a little while, just to kind of get a foot in the door. And then if you actually get in a situation where you can do these things, merchandising or maybe a little independent tour management or something like that, which is, that's what I started doing, independent tour management, which meant like I had to pay my own bills and just go out on the road with a band for a while, But if you take it seriously, you probably remember we talked about this in class. Like it was like treat it like an internship and go out there and really make a point. Like when you go to every city, every venue, shake hands with the promoter, like get to know who's pulling the strings behind the scenes, right, and stay in contact with them and really try to make a good impression. And I've seen people turn that into a career. The booking agent that booked my band, he started off as a drummer in a band and just happened to be the kind of guy that was so good at staying in contact with people and making friends and working hard that he kept getting other opportunities to book shows for other people. And then he eventually became the vice president of like one of the biggest agencies in the country, So, but he started off, sleeping on the floor like we did, So,
right. So you would say like part of it is soft skills, like, being polite, speaking to everybody in the room when you come in, knowing when to talk and when not to talk. And then the other half of that is technical skills.
Yeah, definitely. And approaching, one thing that we definitely talk about in my class is the approach to networking, because everybody kind of like, at Full Sail, you always hear networking, but to me, it's such a, like, you can't underestimate the importance of you bringing value to the conversation. So it can't always be about listen to my band, listen to my artist, listen, like pay attention to me, give me things. How do I get a foot in the door? It has to be like, how can I help you, with your project and stuff, and what can I bring to the table as well? And I think if you find that, people will take you more seriously. Maintain relationships even if there's nothing in it for you for 3 years, because all of a sudden in that third year, something might pop up and you're going to be the first person they think of. So, it's about how you carry yourself. It's about the work that you do, and then it's about taking the extra step to put in the maintenance, to those relationships. I definitely have the personality type where I will randomly just, even if you're just talking about like my friend group, like I'm the one that's putting together get-togethers. I'm the one that's suggesting like, hey, we should all get together and, I don't know, have a game night or whatever it is that That was a nerdy example, but whatever it is that people do, I'm old now, so that's what I'm looking forward to is game nights. But like, if I wasn't putting that out there, those things wouldn't happen. The people, everybody's comfortable sitting at home watching Netflix, you know? So, like, someone, I think, has to have that mentality of, like, let's actually get together and either make something creative or get out of our comfort zone a little bit. And it takes a certain personality type to push you in that direction. And I've either been blessed or cursed with that personality type. But, yeah, I think, you know, constantly evaluating whether or not are you stagnating, or are you actually making yourself a little bit uncomfortable to push your career in the direction that you want it to go in?
Right.
That's really important. And if you see talent in the people around you, which is a skill that artist managers tend to have, push them. You know, bring them with you. Get out of your comfort zone. Right. Put on some real pants. Get out of your pajamas. Turn off Netflix. Let's go. Like actually work on something. You know, like put your abilities to use.
I agree.
So how was like managing your own friends, like being a manager over them?
You know what's weird is I didn't know that that's what was happening at the time. Like, you know, like later on, we all kind of like once we were all looking for different types of jobs and everything, we were kind of breaking down what our experience was. And we were like, you know, like we were managing this thing, like we were booking the shows, we were doing the merchandising and everything like that. But in the moment, it was more just trying to figure out what the next step was in our career as a whole. So there were definitely moments where we didn't see eye to eye on what that step should be. But I think just keeping in mind that we all had the same end goal in mind helped us. And I was lucky to tour with a bunch of people that were friends of mine, like lifelong friends of mine. You know, like my brother was our drummer, as I mentioned. So obviously I've known him for his whole life. Our guitarist was a guy that lived across the street from me since I was 5 years old. So our friendship came first, and then the business stuff came, and that helped us navigate things to a certain degree, you know. But I think it's just a matter of prioritizing things. The thing that we always came back to when we were getting heated or like didn't see eye to eye is to just kind of take a step back, calm down, and even if it takes saying it out loud, like we're all working towards the same goal. We all have the same like long-term result, hopefully in mind. So, you know, right now we may be differing about do we turn left or turn right, but it's all shaping back in that same direction, you know. So that really helped us pull things together, I think.
So, and I know you kind of mentioned it as far as getting that label attention, you know, and things kind of didn't work out the way that that you all quite thought that it would. But what was that whole experience like? Like, was it like you guys were super pumped that you got that label attention? Because that's like the dream of a lot of people who, you know, want to start that tour life and that musician life.
Yeah, it's there were definitely moments of like major excitement when we found out so-and-so was interested in us. In fact, when we landed that booking agent that I mentioned, and just in case anyone's not familiar, like the booking agent, their primary focus is booking tours for you, getting you better shows and everything like that, which we've been doing ourselves. And if anyone out there has done independent booking, you know that most of it is like not having your emails answered. Like, you know, so just getting a name attached to us that got our emails answered was such a huge step in our career that I remember we had been working with this guy and had a relationship with him for a while, and he was interested in us, and we knew he liked his music and all that stuff. And then finally we played this one show in New Jersey, and he watched us play and signed us in the parking lot. And so that was one of our moments where we were like, you know, we were playing it cool in the parking lot, like, oh yeah, you want to work with? Okay, cool, yeah. And then as soon as he was like around the corner, we're in the van, we're like all hugging each other and freaking out, and everything. Like, oh my God. And it was legit. Like, I mean, our lives changed overnight. Like, you know, it was suddenly we got very reputable tours, and the work was coming in, you know. So with the labels, it was more of a matter of being young enough to have incorrect expectations as to what that looks like. I think people still think that means here's a bucket of money, you're going to be famous tomorrow. Yeah. And so as we got older, we realized that that's not actually what that process looks like. It's like, here's a bank loan and you got a 50-50 shot from here. You know, we'll see if we feel like promoting you properly or whatever it might be. And you kind of need the stars to align. There's a lot of luck that's involved, like more than people like to admit, I think, you know. Right. You can engineer your own luck by putting yourself in the right situation sometimes. But yeah, that I think early on we would get wind of like so and so liked your band and so was at your show and they're interested in you, And initially we were like, wow, that's great. We're going to get signed tomorrow. 6 months later, that was the last we'd heard of it, you know?
Right.
And that happened to us enough to where we stopped having emotions and feelings anymore. And we were just like, when we heard that stuff, we were like, okay, we'll see what happens. But even though that sounds a little jaded, it helps you navigate those waters when you actually are in them. You're like, okay, now I realize I don't have to take the first thing that comes my way. We don't have to work with the first person who's interested in us. Let's really evaluate these scenarios and say, if Jane Doe at this particular record label wants to work with us, do we think she gets what we're going for? Do we think that she understands our long-term vision? And if not, let's not be afraid to say no here, because we don't want to lock ourselves into a long-term. And that's really what happened. Was there were a couple of situations that were like, that we just weren't feeling as much.
Right.
And those were the ones that we kind of walked away from on our own. One of them, one situation was something that in retrospect we should have taken. But it was a kind of lesser known label at the time. They were kind of young upstarts,
Right.
and we're like, oh, who are they? 5 years later, they're everybody,
Right.
everybody wants to be on that label. And we could have been one of their early, but we had gotten a little too big for our situation at the time. So, it's all lessons. Everything's lessons.
Exactly. And that seems to be a big thing in the industry right now is artists aren't really looking at what they're signing. They're just jumping right on the first thing, and then you have the other side of it, like you said, walking away from something that could be big as far as in the future. You know what I'm saying?
That's a great point. It really is, like, to me, the most important thing is not the name recognition of the label or the name recognition of the people that you might be working with. It's like, really talk to them and say, do they get what we're going for?
Right.
Have some in-depth conversations about your long-term plans and stuff. Because that's so much. I would rather have someone who really believes in me and is going to do everything they can to fight for me, who's not established or not as established or something, than someone who is a huge name that has 15 other clients and is just kind of like, we'll see what happens with these guys, And I think, in my class is artist management. One thing that we do is we study successful artist managers from history, music history. And you'll see that the ones that are really successful, they usually come from the ground up, like, with their artist. And it's because they believe in them 110%. And they're willing to, like, go to bat for them over and over again.
Any notable ones that you can name?
Well, I am always looking for an excuse to talk about the Beatles, so I'm a huge Beatles fan. But they really were, like, if you dive into, like, the nitty gritty of their background, they were this rough, around the edges bar band that had just played they'd spent all this time being a bar band in Hamburg, Germany, like in the red light district, where it's like, it was like people coming back after World War II and everything like that. So it was like a rough crowd, and they came back to Liverpool, England, which is where they were from, and they had all this practice, so they were really good. They blew every band around there out of the water. But honestly, that's probably where that story would have ended had their manager not stumbled upon them. They didn't really quite know what to do next and everything like that. And the manager that found them immediately, like, had a long-term vision for them. He was like, I think this could be the biggest band in the world, but here's what we need to do. We need to clean up your stage show. We need to put you, like, in clothes that are more friendly to potentially getting you on TV. Mm-hmm. We just need to play the game a little bit to go in that direction. And he shopped them to every record label in England, got turned down by every record label in England, and kept fighting because he believed in that vision so much. Paul Rosenberg with Eminem, they came up together. Let's see. I'm trying to think off the top of my head of who else. Kevin Liles, who works with, like, Trey Songz, Big Sean. Those are some of, like, his the people that he's worked with. He's really well known for being sort of a holistic, hands-on manager that's involved in every little thing. So yeah, like all those. I've got a list that we go through in my class of, like, different artist managers. Right. That's probably 25 people long.
Johnny Wright.
Johnny Wright is great. Yeah. He's Orlando based too. Mm-hmm. He had a compound here. the cool thing about Johnny Wright is that he would make everybody live together and follow the same regimented training, almost like boot camp. So it's like, vocal lessons at this time and then dance rehearsal. And then so they're bonding as people without knowing that that's what's happening because they're all complaining about all this work that they have to do together, Right. But they're also getting trained together too. So, I heavily preach music history importance in my class because there's so many things that you can pull from it without having to go learn things the hard way. The only other way to learn that lesson is to go try something in real time and think you can figure it out yourself, realize that, I messed that up or whatever, but now that just cost you 2 years of your career, Could have learned that from a documentary. Right. So, I learned so much from the Beatles. I always talk about them because they're so well documented, and because they're masters of their craft, it's hard to find any other master of any other craft that has that much information about them available out there.
Right.
They always come to mind for me. I also pull from. Sorry, I'm on a tangent right now.
You're fine.
But I pull a lot from other creative lines of work. So there's a book about Pixar that's really interesting about how they how they manage their creative process. And you can take a lot of lessons from that and apply it to any creative endeavor. I just watched the Imagineering documentary on Disney Plus about, I don't know if you know what that is, but the Imagineers are what they call the Disney engineers who create the theme park rides. And there's a lot of stuff in there that lined up exactly with things that I teach in my music business class. It's just all about managing the creative approach. So, yeah.
That's interesting. Never thought about it like that.
Yeah. I mean, I'm a big fan of football, and the way that I found out about that Pixar book was hearing the general manager of the Colts talk about how he takes things from that Pixar book and uses it to manage his football team. So, and I was like, well, what am I missing here?
Right.
So I went into it and I was like, yeah, there's a lot of things that are applicable. So
yeah, because that's a crazy parallel to football and Disney movies.
Right.
So it's
you would think so, but the whole thing is that you're managing a team of people that are all working towards a common goal. So you find those commonalities and they really become relevant quickly. If you guys want to do a whole episode about the Beatles, let me know. I'm ready to talk about it.
We might have to, yeah. I'm sure there's some gems in there. I'm going to look that up, actually, because I'm interested in that.
Yeah. I'll give you some resources. Cool. I have way too many.
You said something interesting in the while talking about the Beatles, how their manager kind of cleaned them up playing the game, so to speak. And so do you think that what advice would you give to an artist in this day and age because of the rise of independence and I'm going to do it my way type thing? What advice would you give to them about playing the game? Because I know some artists personally, and they're kind of like, I don't want to do it this way. I'm going to do it my way. And I kind of try to tell them, like, well, you might have to do it a certain way. Like, you have your morals and the ground that you stand on.
Yeah.
And then there are compromises that you might have to make.
I think that's a good way of looking at it, is just like drawing that line between, like, what do you really feel strongly about? When you look at what happened with them, they didn't, they didn't go back on any of their morals. They didn't, like anything like that. They just they were wearing leather suits and smoking and drinking on stage, and they were cussing and like all this other stuff. And their goal was to be this huge band, and this is 1963 in England. So what their manager basically said was like, there's no way you're going to get from point A to point B if you don't change something. You can't get on TV in England in 1963 looking like you do and talking like you do, So like, let's make everybody fall in love with you. And then you can do whatever the hell you want. Then you can wear and if you notice from their career, like 3 years later, they're wearing whatever they want. It's like they're dropping acid and their hair's down their back and like all that stuff. So it's a very different band, but they had to get everyone to fall in love with them first. Right. So, but I do think that there's some importance in what do you really stand for? What are you not willing to compromise? But be reasonable about that. Like you don't want to. You don't want to, like, if you come from a particular maybe like community or social movement that you're trying to give a voice to, you don't want to sell that out, obviously. You don't want to make that kind of compromise. But if it's just kind of like, like we said, kind of playing the game a little bit to get people to notice you at first, then, who's another good example of this? Lady Gaga. Like when she first came out, what do you remember about her? Like the clothes, the statements, like the.
Right.
It was right. So
It's really big.
yeah. Before that, she was a singer-songwriter who was like had a very stripped-down image. She went by her real name, which is Stephanie Germanotta. She's like playing the piano, doing singer-songwriter songs, you know. But she had an interest in, I mean, even the name Lady Gaga, I think, is a reference to Queen. So like Freddie Mercury, you know, big theatrical stage shows. I would guess, I've never actually heard her say this, but I would guess from what she was wearing and everything like that she's probably a David Bowie fan. And like Elton John with the big costumes and everything like
Definitely.
that. So she kind of took a page out of their books and was like, okay, I know I can write really good songs. How do I get people to pay attention to me? What's worked in the past? Well, you know, Elton John in a Donald Duck costume on stage like is making people talk about him. So why don't I do something crazy like that? But not so she's kind of doing that aspect of playing the game, and then simultaneously using the voice that gives her to make a statement on behalf of like LGBTQ or like whatever social movements that she prioritized at that point in time. So, you know, it all kind of ties together, but I think there's more strategy involved in it than a lot of young artists give it, you know. And a lot of that's not their own fault, because where are you going to learn all this stuff if you're not in a place like this, or if you're not just feeding yourself documentaries about these artists all the time,
Right.
which you can do, by the way. It's all on Netflix. You can Google the answers to all these questions, but you got to go find it yourself.
Google's your friend.
Yeah.
Right, because she wanted to be an actress
Yes.
first before.
Yeah.
So she said like she would move into music first and then go into acting, because she already wanted to do it, but go ahead and start her platform with music first.
100%. And if you look at what she did, that's, you know, she
Makes
made the
sense.
and it's almost an exact parallel to the Beatles. See, when I talk about them in class, people think it's like old news and it's not relevant anymore. I'm like, watch how often these things pop up again and again and again.
Right.
It's just different eras, different clothes, whatever, you know. But yeah, so she got the attention initially by changing her look, and then she was able to do whatever she wanted. You know, now she can branch off into acting and show these other talents and everything, you know.
Yeah.
So one thing that I talk about is kind of look at artists that you think are similar to you, and ask yourself honestly, if I got dropped in a bucket with all these artists, is there anything that grabs attention, you know, like that would make people look at me a second time as opposed to these 15 other artists that are all same genre as me? You know, and it could be your look, it could be your sound or something like that, but you've got to really be honest about it, because if you're not doing anything different, well, then guess what? You're not just competing with 10 or 15 people, you're competing with what? Thousands,
Everybody.
you know, like
Yeah.
so. If you're not standing out in that small of a sample size, what are you doing? You've got to change something up, you know.
Yeah.
So just be careful about falling into that trap of just doing what everyone else is doing because that's what you think you're supposed to be doing. You know, make an effort to kind of stand apart from them a little bit.
Being open to change as well. Definitely.
Oh, what do you mean by that? Like just like.
Being open to change. So instead of like just always being like yourself or whatever, like you say, if you have a manager or someone that is coming in and they want to change your look or whatever, be open to it. Just kind of being, like you said, some artists when they start out, they don't know who they are. But so just being open to it.
Yeah.
Being open to your manager speaking to you and helping you out.
That really helps. A lot of like newer artists are so like worried about everybody trying to change them or something like that they forget that the purest version of what we're talking about doesn't involve doing anything you don't want to do. It's like the purest version of what we're talking about is look at your legitimate influences, who really like shaped how you write and how you think about your art. Pull inspiration from them. Don't be afraid, because like people get so worried about like, oh, I want to be 100% unique and I don't want to copy anybody or whatever, but like nobody's like that's not a real thing. That's a false expectation that's being set out there. You're making a form of art that's been made for hundreds of years, and your tools in making that art are your inspirations, like the people that you know, like I look at music as a conversation, right? So what is going to be your personal vocabulary, and you assemble that from your musical influences, your fashion influences, like that, you know. So the thing that makes you unique might be that you have a certain combination of artists who influence you in a very interesting way that makes you different than everybody else. Right. If you look at the video for Thriller by Michael Jackson,
Great video.
A groundbreaking, game-changing, life-changing, world-changing music video, right? The pitch for that video looks like him talking about, I like Hollywood musicals like West Side Story. I like horror movies like the Universal Monster movies. And I like, Night of the Living Dead and things like that. And then also I make pop music that you can dance to. Mm-hmm. And if you say that on paper, it sounds like an insane person talking, right? But if you look at that video, they're wearing 50s clothes like West Side Story. They're it's like the zombie makeup effects of these old Hollywood movies. They're doing shot-for-shot stuff from the old Universal werewolf movies, So he figured out a vision that tied all those things together in a really unique way. But he's pulling those visions from something. He just has like a very interesting way of doing it. I think that's what true artists can do. Is like they build their vocabulary and then start a very interesting conversation on their own, kind of.
Any horror stories from the industry or in your teaching career that you want to...
Horror story? You don't want to hear those. It's just me yelling at a paper, like, on my computer or whatever. Like, why didn't you listen to me? I definitely have horror stories. I'm trying to think of like what might be. There's a couple I tell in class that I pull lessons from. In one case, my band was very. We had a very poppy singer who got comparisons to Justin Timberlake, but a lot of our friends were in hardcore bands. They were like, oh, like screaming and stuff. Yeah. And we always ended up on these shows with all these heavy bands. And we were also co-managed by, maybe since we're recording, I won't name the actual band, but we were co-managed by a band that's very well established now, like by a couple of members of that band that's well known. And we played a show where once we started playing, a couple of the guys that were like hardcore music fans didn't like how poppy we were. So they got mad. And long story short, one of them got up on the other one's shoulders. He pulled a disco ball down from the ceiling and he threw it up on stage at us. And then two of the guys from the band that co-managed us jumped out into the audience and we're just like beating the crap out of this kid in the audience while we're still playing. Like, what's going on? So I pull a bunch of lessons from that in class because we really did learn a couple of different things from that experience.
Wow.
I have an actual horror. You said the word horror, and I have like a borderline paranormal experience from tour that's kind of interesting.
I would love to hear that.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's a little long. I'm trying to think of the shortened version of it. So one thing you have to know is that I have a history of having night terrors. I used to sleepwalk a lot when I was a kid. Wow. Yeah. I used to like wake up at my bus stop and things like that with my backpack on and be like, really? What's going on?
That's
like I haven't really rode the bus in 2 years.
That's insane.
The scariest one is I woke up driving my car one time. Like not too far from my house, luckily, but I woke up because somebody was beeping their horn at me and I was like, like came home, gave my brother my keys. And I was like, yo,
scary.
Watch me, dude. Like, make sure I don't leave. So in my night terrors, there's this one lady that has popped up repeatedly over and over again. I kept seeing her, and basically what happens is while I'm asleep, I become frozen, and this woman walks into my room. She locks eyes with me and like follows me like as she creeps across the room, and I'm just like staring in my bed like looking at her. And then she crouches down, and she looks terrified, like someone's after her, basically. So we played, and I've seen her off and on for years. I thought that I stopped having my night terrors at a certain point. And I was with my now wife, but when we were dating, she was at my house, and we were both asleep. And I had the first night terror that I'd had in probably 6 years or something like that. And I jumped from, like, I was on this side of the bed. I went clear over her and was yelling all kinds of obscenities and, like, pointing. I was like, who is that? Who is that? In the corner. And I grabbed a baseball bat, like, out of the corner of the room. And then she had no idea what was going on. She thought, actually, like, there was someone in the room. So she, like, pulled the sheet over her head. And she was like, what's going on? She's freaking out. And so I'm, like, about to go, like, after this thing. And then I kind of, like, wake up and I'm like, oh, well, that was crazy. Put the bat down and go back to sleep. And she's like, what was that? Like, you need to wake up and we need to talk about what just happened, So the woman that I saw in that night terror, cut to a few years later, we used to play in Pontiac, Michigan all the time. There's a venue there called the Crowfoot, and it's outside of Detroit. It's a really cool venue. Some of our best shows were there, but Pontiac is like a ghost town, or at least it was when we were playing there. This was maybe 7-8 years ago. And when I say that, I mean like we played there. then the owner of the place took us across the street to these abandoned apartments, and like you could walk in like people's apartments, and they're like their furniture was still there and stuff, but they hadn't been there in however long. So it's like it's really it's just got a creepy, eerie feeling to it, right? So everybody else goes off to this club to hang out after we played. And it's like late at night, and I was starving. So I'm like walking around looking for food somewhere. And it's just me on this like long, narrow street, you know, with all these buildings and everything's closing. And it's like dark and cold. It looks like a horror movie, like straight up. And so everybody else is gone. I find this one little diner that's open for another like 20 minutes or something like that. And I felt bad going in there and asking them for food, but I was like, yo, like I'll eat it outside, you know, like I don't want to make a mess and keep you guys here later or whatever. So they sold me something to eat, and then I took it outside, and then they all closed the shop and they left and went out the back way, right? So it's for real just me sitting on a bench in the middle of this creepy town, eating my food, and way down the street, I see somebody like walking towards me, and it looked just like a homeless person or you know something, and I was like, oh, like, and since I was alone, didn't know the area, I was like getting a little like, I was like, what's about to happen? Is this, you know, what is this? And so like they keep coming, they cross the street to my side of the road, and I'm like, oh man, I'm gonna have to do something. I was like, I'll just give them my food and it'll be fine, you know, like I'll leave it alone. But then they like come and they're bundled up in this big jacket and everything like that. And I look up, and the woman is like from where I am to about where you are. Yeah. And I swear to you, like I'm not even like big into paranormal stuff, but this situation changed my mind. It was the woman from my night terrors. Like serious? Her face looked exactly like the woman from my night terrors, and she didn't say anything to me. So she was just like looking at me, and I was like, "What do you want?" And then I was like, "Wait, am I asleep right now?" And so I'm kind of like looking around, and I'm like, hey, like, you know, trying to wake up and stuff. And I'm like, all right, I got to get out of here. So I'm like, just take my food. I'm going to run. Like, don't judge me. I'm going to run. But, like, so I just left my food there, and I just like hauled ass down the street, you know. Oh my God. And like I got to my friends. I was like, are we awake? Am I awake? You know, and they're like, what are you talking about? So the crazier thing is I haven't seen that woman in my night terrors since then. So I'm like, maybe I helped her. Maybe I was nice. Yeah, something like that. So, yeah, you should have heard me trying to describe that to everybody in the van that night. I was like, this lady from my nightmares is like, you know, she's Freddy Krueger in me or something. So, yeah, that's probably the craziest one.
Yeah, that's
definitely.
I still get chills when I think about it because it was like so real. It creeps me out.
Insane.
Maybe I'm still asleep. Maybe you guys are all in my dream right now.
Right? Maybe this is a dream.
Did I write about it? I don't know how to work that into a song. But,
no, you can make it like a film or
I actually have thought about making like a short film about that. I should give that some more thought. I had like a whole like movie idea based around it. But if you look at my voice memos on my phone, I have like 150 different ideas, and I'm like, I should pick that one to stick with, you know, flesh it out.
Yeah.
It's definitely scary. Now I'm worried. Tonight I'm gonna have a night terror, and it's because of this.
Hopefully not.
Summoned all the evil.
Please don't blame us.
This is your fault.
So you recently released new music on Spotify, correct?
Yes.
Oh, shameless plug time.
Right. Yeah.
What's it called? And
so the band is called Yeah Sure, and honestly, it just came from, I just miss playing music with my friends. We were kind of like looking at it like, hey, do we really want to like go out and like tour and try to make something happen? And we were kind of like, I don't know. But what we would like to do is write and release songs. I've been producing music videos, and I shot like a short pilot thing and stuff like that. So we really like that aspect of it too. So yeah, we were like, well, why don't we just like release some music, put some videos out. We don't have to like pour everything in the world into it. You know, we were trying to get back to what made it fun for us in the first place. So, and our guitarist currently lives in Texas. So it's like we weren't really able to play shows or anything like that. He's working on moving back here, so that may change. But we were just like trying to be 100% honest with, we're playing for fun. Let's only do stuff that we feel strongly about, like only play songs that we really love and like would enjoy to play. So a lot of it is very influenced by all of us grew up on like 90s like grunge and alternative music, like Nirvana. Nirvana's probably the biggest influence, but things like that. And then we're all fans of like 60s like Beatles and, you know, things like that. So we're Beach Boys as well. So we're hoping that our sound is somewhere between like Nirvana and Beach Boys and like all that kind of stuff. So it's kind of like a dark twist on those vibes. I know 90s stuff is very in right now, but that was a happy accident, you know, but it's just what we happen to love. So yeah, we shot a music video recently. The song kind of talks about the culture of school shooting, so it's a little bit dark. The video kind of follows through with that theme, and it's kind of interesting. So yeah, you can see it. It's at yeahsureband.com. Yeah, we made our website look very 90s on purpose. Like it's very like it looks like those old school like I don't know if you're even old enough to remember what a guest book is on a website. Do you know what that is? No. Wow.
We can cut that if you don't want that.
That's fine. Again, no shame. Like I barely remember it, but this was like back in the what is it, AOL Instant Messenger days, like all the all that your away messages and things like that. So yeah, our website looks like that era basically. Like, yeah.
So gearing a little bit more towards streaming, how do you feel about your music on Spotify?
It's fine. I mean, you just look at it as a promotional tool because until you get to a certain point, you're not gonna, especially if you're splitting songwriting royalties. I think we did the math and we get per person in our band of 4 people, we get 0.0035 cents for every stream. You know, so. It is what it is, but again, it's a good way to sort of just like grow your fan base and everything. Yeah, we've been talking a little bit more about which angle we're going to hit, and I think because of the visuals and some of the storytelling elements that we have, I think we want to focus a little bit more on YouTube and you know just. To be able to convey I think that our look and the vibe of how we're shooting everything, filming everything, is a big part of our identity as a band. So we just kind of want to focus on that. But yeah, Spotify's fine. It's there. It's you're not going to make a killing on it unless you really get your numbers way up. But it is what it is. That's how people listen to music. Yeah, for sure.
So, cool. Final question. So, or not even a question. I guess it is a question. Your biggest piece of advice for any up-and-coming artists or anybody thinking about getting into artist management, just your biggest piece of advice overall for anything like that.
Let's see. Do your homework. And what I mean by that is for real, like learn your music history. It sounds like old man advice, but like I'm telling you, there's so many things I found from studying other people's careers that would have saved me, 1 or 2 year chunks of my own career if I'd just known about it. And as we mentioned, like I know in public schools this stuff's not being taught. So like you've got to find it on your own, but it's there. So whoever your favorite artists are, whoever you kind of like look up to, dive into their background and start Google who manages them. Try to find that out and find YouTube interviews with them. I listen to podcasts all the time. You can find a lot of information long form interviews with some of the most successful artist managers of all time, and they'll give you ideas that'll feed into your work. So don't be afraid to pull those influences. I think that's probably a big one. And I think the other thing is really focus on what makes you interesting as a person and how you can incorporate that into the storytelling of your career. If you think about the artists that you love, it's the music that you like, but also what do you really connect with? It's a story. Like it's either stories that they tell in their lyrics or the story of their lives or a part of their personality. So something I say in my class a lot is just like the audience only sees what you show them. So be very deliberate about telling whatever stories or things from your personality that you think are interesting, show it to them because they don't know it exists if you don't find an interesting way to do it, So, that's probably the 2 biggest things. I could talk for 45 more minutes, so I'll stop there.
Okay, cool. I think we got it. That's good. Great advice. We appreciate having you here.
Absolutely.
Yes,
this was fun.
Thank you for
Yeah, my pleasure.
And I think we got it. SPARKCast podcast.